Hey, Energy Matters listeners, welcome back to another episode. We've got a super special guest for you today. Her name is Katie Dalebout. She's got a kick-ass podcast. I'm here with her and my co-host, Cody Edner. Welcome. Hey, Katie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And hey, Cody.
Hey,
And
David.
Katie. The three of us are going to be chatty the way Katie was in kindergarten. Before I get into your bio, Katie, I was reading your bio, and on there it said 1990. Was it 96? Kindergarten teacher calls me chatty.
Yeah, on my
Who
website.
gets labeled chatty in kindergarten? My God.
That was awesome, and that led to obviously you being a very prolific podcaster. The Let It Out podcast, which is awesome. You have had some amazing guests, and you have the Let It Out book, a journey through journaling. Katie has been featured on Mind, Body, Green, Women's Health, Glamour, Hay House Radio, The Huffington Post, and like 30 other places. So you have been around. How did you get started on this journey from being chatty in kindergarten to being such a prolific podcaster, blogger, and writer?
It's so funny that you guys have latched on to that. I didn't even remember that was on my this like timeline I have on my old website.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. All through elementary school, teachers would say to my mom, she's always talking in class. She's talking to the person next to her, not getting her stuff done. And I was called a chatty Cathy, and it was just like I made it in my mind. This is a bad thing. But I guess now, who's the one laughing now? I feel like I'm literally talking for a living. But it is true. I mean, I love doing this podcast, and I started this podcast when I was 22, before really people knew what podcasting was. It was, pre-Serial and a lot of the podcasts that really put podcasting on the map. And so, I was one of the few people talking about wellness who was like a young woman at the time, and in podcasting at least, in that medium. And so now there's, 10 million of them, and there's like so many. But at the time it was, I kind of the only game in town, but I kept doing it. And I realized, as the podcast grew and it changed, because I grew and changed, and it really was wellness focused when I started. And that was where I was, I was fascinated by trying to understand how to be a person in the world, how to be an adult. And for me, that kind of came through spirituality and wellness and the traditional sense of wellness. And then a couple of years later, I was really off put by personal growth and self-help and wellness. And I was burnt out by it. And I was just like, I want to start living my life. And I realized that, people who are very into self-help are really great. Honestly, they don't necessarily think that they're great, so I had to really kind of let go of it and start to have a life outside of trying to control my life to be better, and just start living a life. So I realized that true wellness isn't just about green juice and yoga and meditation. It's also relationships and creativity and your work and your life. And so the podcast, I've really grown up through the podcast. Now on the podcast, I talk to actors and comedians as often as I talk to yoga teachers and people more traditionally in wellness, doctors, because I believe that wellness is something that looks different on everyone. And so I talk to everyone through the lens of self-care and routines and mindset, and those things are always part of it. But also I want to just talk about feeling feelings and letting out whatever you're hiding. And so that's why my book and my work and my world is called Let It Out, because another thing that happened when I was little, my mom, whenever I was sick, would be like, if I needed to throw up or I like had the sniffles, she'd be like, you got to let it out. You got to let it out. And I think that's really true with our emotions, like you have to release it. You have to let it out, because if you don't, it just gets caught in your body and you're hiding something. And whenever you're hiding, you kind of have to manage, and you're not being yourself in the world. So when you let it out, you can feel a bit lighter. And so I talk about that in terms of feelings, in terms of connecting with people. And that's what I do on the podcast and through my writing now.
And you do such a great job, Katie, of having enthusiasm for like everything. I mean, some of the titles of your podcasts, it's like relationship, love, addiction, growth. I was looking at some of the titles, just like blown away, and the versatility of it. And it does seem like everything inspires you. I'm so impressed by that. And the amount of podcasts that you've done and the length of each episode, they're like 2.5 hours. You just roll. And that is super impressive. Me and Cody were talking about that before. We go an hour in and we're like, whoa, oh my God. She's just going. What is it? What do you think it is that gets you so enthusiastic and inspired by all of these different kinds of people and fields and creative energies? Where does that come from?
I don't know. I mean, and it's not every day. I mean, I'm not like this like cheerleader, enthusiastic person every second of every day. I think maybe on the internet I can seem like that, but I don't know. I mean, I genuinely am curious. I'm curious in people. I like asking questions. I like getting to know people. I like seeing myself and other people. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Podcasts really were a window for me to grow my world, and that's what I hope my podcast can do for other people, is to teach them ideas that maybe they wouldn't have discovered on their own, or see something in a different way, or through me see themselves and then see a way that they can grow or change or be articulated in some way. And so, I think that the biggest creativity hack is extreme presence. Like if you can just be really present with the one thing you're doing. And I think that also is the biggest anti-anxiety hack. Like if you can just be really present doing one thing, as someone who's anxious and as someone who, can overwhelm easily. I think if I'm just present doing one thing. And so that's what I love about the podcast is I'm forced to do one thing. I'm forced to just sit there and talk to the person I'm talking to. I can't be on my phone. I can't be thinking about other things, because if I do, I sound silly and I have to edit that, or I forget the thread of the conversation. So I think that presence is what, I've done almost 300 of these now and so many hours of them, that I really think that I keep doing it because it feeds me so much. And I think it's the new networking. I really think podcasting is the new networking.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely.
Who do you listen to?
So many things. I mean, I love Terry Gross. I listen to Fresh Air a couple times a week for sure. I listen to This American Life pretty often. I'm constantly finding new things. I don't listen to anything in traditional wellness or in people doing anything similar to me, even friends of mine, just because I used to, and I've like dabbled in and out, but I find that I don't want it to seep into my work. And like, I don't want to start to pick up someone's mannerisms by accident, which I've done before. I don't want to be like, oh, I should have that guest on too. Or like, it's fine if we have overlap, and we often do, but I think I try to distance myself from listening to things in my space, I mostly listen to comedy podcasts. I listen to Mark Maron and Pete Holmes. I listen to Melissa Broder has this great podcast called Eating Alone in My Car, which I love. And I will say one person who is sort of similar to what I do, but she's a really close friend of mine. And I think in any wellness space, I always want to plug her podcast. She has a podcast called Food Psych. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but she's a dietitian and nutritionist and practices health at every size, and is really destigmatizing our diet culture that we live in, and our culture that's very mean to people of different sizes. And it's a wonderful podcast, and it sounds really heavy, but it's not. She's such an inviting host that's one that I like always want to plug, because Christy just does such a great job with that podcast.
Who is Food Psych, you say?
Food Psych, yes. It's so.
And what's her name? Christy
Harrison.
Christy Harrison. Oh, very. I noted in your kind of your timeline, your bio, that you got into food by starting with a failed cleanse. I think you called it, or failing at a cleanse. What I don't know. I just want to hear about that. I love that phrase, like a failed cleanse, because I've tried cleanses before and I've failed at them, but I've never publicly announced that.
Yeah, I mean, I think cleanses are really damaging, and I came into wellness from an eating disorder. So I had, anorexia, which turned into orthorexia. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but it's an obsession in an OCD sort of a way with healthy food and healthy eating and dieting, essentially. And I think my eating disorder recovery was, at this time where wellness is so mainstream and so glorified in our society, but part of that is lovely, but most of it, I believe, is actually really damaging because it's hijacking diet culture. And so it's saying to you that, oh, I'm just eating clean, but it's honestly you're on a diet and you're doing something on the basis of like trying to manipulate your natural body size to be a certain way. And if you really start to break that down of why are you trying to manipulate your body size to be a certain way, it's because we've gotten messages from the media and from society since we were young, especially women, but everyone saying fat is bad and thin is good. And until recently, the only fat characters, and I use that word as a descriptor and very intentionally to reclaim it, that those people weren't portrayed in the media. Growing up, the only fat character I remembered seeing in Disney movies was Ursula, who was evil, right? Everyone else you saw was these thin characters. So we have this thin ideal that we idealize, and whatever's most difficult to attain and cost the most resources to attain is what the society's beauty standard will go to. And so wellness has hijacked a lot of this messaging of like, sometimes it really can be to feel good and feel the best in your body, but then there's this nice little side effect that you'll lose weight, and people attach to that instead of like making it about these other things. And so I think it's a really slippery slope, and Christy Harrison's podcast talks about that much more articulately than I do. But that was really my story of like, I got so attached to wellness, like I was starting to say at the beginning, and personal growth, that I was not really living my life. My entire life was devoted to like, how much sleep can I get and how can I live in this regimented way? And it's really sad to, we live in bodies and we live in this world. And so it's really sad to deny ourselves some physical pleasure or to, live in such a rigid way. And as someone who can be so overly disciplined, I think it can be really damaging. So in terms of the cleanse, I think, there are far too many people doing cleanses or trying to control. And I think that, it can be really damaging for our bodies and our metabolism. And like, it definitely was for me mentally. So I'm really against that. I think that eating foods that make you feel good and not overthinking it is the healthiest. That's the cleanse we all should be on, I think.
How did you get through it, Katie? How did you get bust out of it?
I don't know if I have. I mean, I think I'm a pretty malleable person, so I think it's constantly kind of coming in and out of it. And I think wellness culture and diet culture don't make it easy. I think it's like listening to Christy's podcast. She's a friend of mine now, and like, understanding health at every size, which is, a movement that shows that people at any body size, weight is not a marker of health. I think that's something that really helps me. I think just trying to diversify my coping mechanisms and have a community of people who aren't defined by the way that they look and their bodies. I think that's been helpful, finding role models that are my size or bigger to admire, and not trying to find my worth with how I look or what my body size is. Because for me, it really came down to, I didn't feel like I was smart enough or cool enough or pretty enough when I was a kid. And so I was like, all right, or a teenager or an adult for that matter. And so I was like, okay, well, to feel good enough, I'll just be thin enough. And then that's praised in society. So I'm not good enough in any of these other ways, but I can control this. So I went there. And so understanding that and having the self-awareness of that, it's still where I go when I like feel uncomfortable, but it's understanding like, okay, this isn't going to give me what I want from it, which is love and acceptance and for people to like me. Because at the end of the day, I could be very unhealthy and anorexic and still, in that body, people may not like me. I can't control how people feel about me. So it's like finding my worth outside of my physicality. So whenever I'm doing that, doing something creative feels really good, writing and making something and being around people and just feel, it goes back to let it out. It's like feeling my feelings, being in that uncomfortable feeling of like, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling uncomfortable. And a way for me to tune out of that was to control or to plan or to overthink. And so just be like, this is what's happening right now. And I'm sure, as you guys know, on the other side of feeling an uncomfortable feeling, if you just breathe and you sit in it and you feel it, then there's joy and there's acceptance and there's good stuff there. And then eventually it comes back. It's just like blowing your nose, you know, it's like you blow your nose and you get it all, but then like eventually you're gonna have to blow your nose again, you know? So it's just like, it's like feeling's the same thing. You just have to keep going and keep doing it. And, you know, it's hard to be a person. And so I think I'm constantly coming in and out, and I have lots of tools, like more traditionally in wellness is, I think you guys know, I do TM or Vedic meditation, and that's been a really useful tool for me. Obviously, I wrote a book about journaling, so I do have these practices that, you know, I guess more traditionally in wellness that are very useful and really help me.
When did you start journaling?
So I didn't grow up journaling. I never grew up keeping a diary or writing in any way. But when I was in eating disorder treatment, what was such a gift from that experience happening when I was so young is that it got me into therapy and contemplating my existence and having self-awareness very young. And so I was reading every self-help book under the sun. I was going to all of the meetings and support groups and therapy, and I had all of the mentors and I was doing all the things, and I found myself with a gift card in a Barnes & Noble, like about to buy the next self-help book or diet book, and I stood there and I was just like, all of these are exactly what worked for that person, but it might not work for me. And clearly it's not working for me because I know I've read all of them. And so I wandered out of the self-help section into the stationery section, and I just bought myself this colorful journal. And I spent that summer outside just writing down my raw, real, unfiltered thoughts and feelings, like the really lofty goals I was too afraid to tell anyone because I thought that they would think they were silly, or the really dark thoughts I was having that I didn't want to tell anyone because I was afraid they would be scared. So I was able to be myself for the first time, and that felt good. And so I kept doing it and eventually recommending it to other people, but I just kind of fell upon it. Nobody told me to do it.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. And how
Did
about
you think of yourself as a writer before that, or was this just more personal, therapeutic? And
yeah, I mean, journaling for me is definitely not like, I say this in the book. I just taught a workshop about this weekend. Journaling, you don't have to be a writer to journal. If you can write a text, you can journal. If you can write an email, you can journal. So that sort of writing is innate to us. And I didn't really think of myself as a writer. At that point, I studied journalism, but I wanted to be a TV news reporter when I was young. But I definitely I will say, like, I don't want this to be a deterrent to people journaling. You definitely don't need to identify as a writer. I definitely identify as a writer now. And I will say I always, you know, in school growing up, I enjoyed writing like more than other things, but I wasn't necessarily good at it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the process of starting my first book, and it is so intimidating.
No, that's why I asked that, because I struggle with writing, and I don't identify myself as a writer, but I've been a teacher for 30 years of meditation and spiritual practices, and making that leap into writing, it's intimidating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be really daunting, but I think, you know, if you have something to say, you can be a writer. And the way that we want to read now is like someone having a conversation with us. You know, there's definitely I've been taking a lot of writing classes in New York recently because I'm working on a new project. And so I've been learning about the craft of the personal essay. And I've been really trying to develop this craft because I kind of fell into it. And now I'm writing and I want to improve. But I think that in terms of writing or writing a book, like if you have something to say, like just writing as you speak, like as you would say it to a friend. And then you can go back through it. And there's so many great writing books that, like, I don't know if you guys have read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, That's like a very famous writing book. Or Still Writing by Danny Shapiro is like a very good writing book. But in my book, starting with journaling might be like a really useful tool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for those. I'm going to check them both out. I also like Writing Down Bones by Natalie Gold.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a classic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a writing teacher, Ann Randolph. She does an awesome job. She teaches great retreats. And what she does is you do improv half the time and writing half the time.
So cool.
You get up and move and get really crazy and silly. And then that, for me, like flushes a lot of energy out. And then she'll give you a prompt and give you 10 minutes. And then you have to read it in front of everybody. And then everyone kind of shares.
Wow, that sounds fun.
Yeah, the first time I did it, so I signed up for a writing retreat with her, and I didn't know there was improv, so I show up. It was on the island of Kauai in Hawaii, and I show up, and she's like, "All right, everybody get up and run around like you're a chicken." And I was like, "What the fuck? What? What does she want me to do?" And then the next thing she did was like, "Stand in a circle. I want you to go around, say if you're in a relationship or you're single." I was like, "What?" I was like, and you know, I was running a meditation school, and I was always kind of in charge, so it really challenged me to be open.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. Oh boy, it was tough, and I loved it. I loved it so much, and realized how valuable writing was in that moment when I started really just letting it come out. It was fascinating to see
Let it out.
And that's when you did your first stand-up at the end of that, right? You sent me that video. That's hysterical.
Yeah. And what I found was that like a lot of comedy wanted to come out of me. A lot of people were writing some really deep emotional stuff, which I got to some of, but I just wanted to do comedy, Katie. I was like, I just want to say funny, offensive shit. And I just want to watch people's expressions.
Is that what you do now? Are you a comic?
No, I mean, when I teach.
He's a reluctant comic, yeah.
I definitely infuse it into, like I teach on some different apps, and might be one of the only meditation teachers, like when you listen to the guided stuff, where I'll throw in jokes from like a Jerry Seinfeld or somebody like that, and some of my own. Because what I found is like when you meditate, it tends to be like a really serious process. And when I teach in person here I'm not in Los Angeles today, but usually in LA, I'll ask everyone to get ready, we'll start. And then it's just like, it's like an army that you just set a 10, and everyone's just like shoulders straight up, like,
yeah.
And they hold their bodies hostage, like,
yeah,
perfected Buddha state. And I just want to be like, guys, chill the fuck out. Let's just sit and see what comes.
It's so needed.
I think that what you're just describing, David, reminds me of what you were talking about, Katie, in the wellness, where it becomes this regimented thing to kind of manipulate where you are and how you're being, whether it's in your body or in your mind and the spiritual side of it. And both David and I use lots of amusement in our meditation and our spiritual practice.
Yeah.
So important. I think make it funny and laugh at this, and just like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's really fucking funny that like we're all people in this world, we're all gonna die, and here we're all trying to control, like we're trying to control being better, we're trying to control being more present, we're trying, like, I think the people who are into self-help and probably listen to the podcast are the best people in the world, but also they're the people who are like, I don't know. There are people out there who like never will get into this and are just fine. You know what I mean? So like you have to laugh at like those of us who are here, who are like contemplating our existence and trying to get better and like reading all the books and doing all the meditation and finding the foods, and like, I love us, but like it's kind of funny because there are some people who just like live their life and like they're cool, you know?
Yeah, they're like, why do I need all that? I'm already present.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do I need some dude telling me to be present all day?
Exactly. Yeah. Like I know people like that, and they're an anomaly to me. I'm like, but I'm over here and I'm anxious and I'm feeling so many feelings and I need to meditate. It's like, be where you are naturally. It's insane.
I know. Some of us are born with more issues, I guess, than others.
And I love us. Like I wouldn't trade us. I love that us, but you know, like my best friend, I'm really, you know, feel things way up here and way down here, and she's just really even. And that's a good force to have in my life, but you know, she doesn't need to meditate because she's just like chill all the time. And that's right. I mean, I'm sure it would help her, and she has before, I'm sure. And it's like, it's all good. But, you know, she's just like, she doesn't feel things as intensely as I do. She's learned to control the dial, and we couldn't be more different. And I have a lot of people in my life like that, but I also have so many people who are like me, and they're kind of crazy, and I love them too, you know? And I see myself reflected, and so many who listen to my podcast are way more similar to me, and I meet them and I'm like, oh my, yeah, no wonder, like you're I get it, like I get it.
You give them permission to be themselves.
Hopefully. Yeah. Nobody needs permission, but I mean, I'll take it if anyone wants to give it to me. So if I can do that for other people, great.
Cody, I think that's me and you. That's what Katie was describing between her and her friend. I'm like a roller coaster, and you're like the even keel.
Right.
Yeah. Always
Yeah.
one of those in a relationship.
That's right. We have a very unique relationship, me and Cody. I call him freaking out, and he's like, I grew up on a ranch. Calm down.
Oh, I love that.
I grew up around horses, you know.
I grew up in Jersey.
Yeah, you grew up in Jersey, yeah.
How did you guys meet?
Tinder. No. I didn't meet. I was running, or I wasn't running the school yet, but I was at a training school in Hawaii, and Cody was a guest. He would fly in, teach.
Yeah.
And just kind of started just chatting, hanging out a little bit. And he's like, hey, let's start a podcast.
So smart.
I was like, oh, I don't have any friends. All right, let's start a podcast. Yeah, maybe we'll make some. Maybe Katie will be our friend.
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm totally in.
We could just get people on, ask them, will you be our friend? At least for an hour.
Welcome to the Energy Matters podcast. Will you be our friend?
You have a great dynamic, and I think it's cool. But I think having a co-host is like the best thing about podcasting.
Yeah, it's awesome. Whenever I don't have a question, I'm just like, Cody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I do have actually another question, Katie. Kind of, I don't know if this is changing the subject, but I'm really curious about your book and the kind of feedback, like how you've heard that journaling has helped people. And, you know what, just because, well, I've often wanted to journal, and I know there's some therapeutic quality to that. And yet I kind of hit a block in trying to, you know, I do a lot of meditating. So I do a lot of self-reflecting and contemplation, but in a different way, right? Not as a written.
You're such a man.
Yeah, just.
Well, I think it's really similar. I mean, I think this patient, and I think they're great complements to each other. I just taught a journaling workshop. I often teach kind of similar content from my book at different places in the city. And I just taught one at a meditation studio I love here. And I was saying there, I was like, it's such a great complement to meditation. I know I get so many ideas while I'm meditating that I kind of need to get out of my mind somewhere. So right after is a really potent time to meditate. Or sometimes I feel like I can't meditate. I have so much on my mind. I just need to like jot a few things down, and then I can sit down, and at least it's like I know I'm not going to be thinking about it. It's there and I can return to it. And that does help. But I just taught this workshop yesterday here at the class. It's like this exercise class here. And I gave them my 3 pieces of resistance that I often get for journaling when I recommend it to people. And then that will kind of lead into my like tips for you, Cody, of like someone who wants to start journaling, but is like, do I need this? How do I do it? I kind of want to try, but I'm resistant to it. So the first, when I started doing it, like I was telling you guys, just because I stumbled into it and I found relief from it. It was cathartic to me. So inevitably, as you know, myself, I had to share it with other people. And so I started recommending it to other people, and I got so much resistance. Like it did not go well. Like nobody was like, okay.
Oh, really?
Like nobody wanted to do it. And so the first thing that people would always say was, I don't have time to journal. And I was like, okay, that's fair. Like I barely have time to brush my teeth. Let me think about this. And I was like, okay, well, somehow I'm finding time for this. And the beauty of journaling is that it's free. You can do it anywhere. You don't really need anything for it. And you can do it at any time of day. So I think journaling is about just like carving it. I don't want to add another wellness to do to your long list of like, I got to have the warm water with lemon, and I got to meditate, and I got to work out, and I got to sleep. Like, I don't want this to be another to do. Like you can do this while you're on the subway, or you can do this while you're walking and voice journaling, or you can just grab a few minutes between things. Like that's what's really great about it. Or you can carve out some time like on a Saturday and and really sit with it, like there's a lot of options with it. And so that was that. And then another piece of resistance I got was what we kind of already addressed, which was that I'm not a writer and I wouldn't have anything to say. And so the not a writer piece we already talked about, like this type of writing is innate to us. If you can text, you can journal. And then not having anything to say, that's interesting because journaling is simply talking to yourself. And if you can talk to another person, you have something to say. So I found out when I was researching the book, we have over 60,000 thoughts a day. And a lot of those thoughts are repeat thoughts we're thinking on repeat that we're not even aware of. And so if you can take them out of your mind and put them on a page, much like you're watching your thoughts in meditation, but if you can put them on the page, you can kind of sort through them and you can see all these different voices you have in your mind, and not in a pathological way, but just in a way of, you have the kind of this board of directors of the inner child and the parent and the one that's trying to keep you safe and the one that's like telling you to go do the thing, and you can decide which one you want to listen to, which one's holding you back and making you feel like you're not enough. So that was the resistance I got, and then it led me into these tips for journaling, which are: don't judge yourself, just write without editing, write without thinking about your future self reading it or anyone else reading it. And just let it out and let it flow and give yourself some time and space. And there's really no reason there's no way to do it wrong. There's no way to, unless you're judging yourself or filtering. And so if you're doing that, that's fine, but that's not really journaling. That's like writing an email to someone, or that's like writing yourself a letter, so it's fine. But journaling is like, just do it, get it out of your head, just to release it, so I think it's a great complement to meditation. But a lot of, sometimes I go through periods where I'll journal very frequently, and sometimes I'll just check in with it less frequently. But meditation, I find, is something I do daily. And I think the complement of meditation with journaling is lovely, because meditating allows me to, forces me in a very uncomfortable way sometimes to be with myself and to sit with whatever feeling I'm having. And journaling does the same thing. It can be very uncomfortable for people, because it is for me often, because it puts the mirror up in your face of what you're hiding or what you're not wanting to look at, and it forces you to look at it. And I think that's why we don't want to do it. Like, that's why we have resistance to it, because we don't want to feel the feelings we don't want to feel. And journaling will force you, if you're being honest with yourself, to look at, what's holding you back or where you want to go. And then you're responsible for going out to get it, which can be very scary.
Yeah. The way you describe that, it sounds like a way of processing, just like we would meditating, but there's something more involved, maybe because the whole body's kind of involved.
Yeah, I think it's a great complement to it, honestly.
Yeah.
I think I struggled a lot to sit down and meditate if I have something in my mind. If I can just write it down, I'm like, okay, it's there for later. And same thing on the other end. Like, after meditating, I find I often need to write if I have time, and sometimes I don't have time to do both, but I find they really, really complement each other well.
It forces us to feel what we don't want to feel.
Mm-hmm.
I think Oprah would say, "That's a tweetable moment." Have you ever seen her on Super Soul Sunday? Every time someone says something insightful, she goes, "That's a tweetable moment." And I'm like, why'd you do that? It was really good until that. I also wanted to make sure that we spent a little bit of time talking about podcasting, because I feel like that is just what you are so, so good at. And like, your voice comes through so authentically. If you guys haven't listened to Katie's podcast, please do. And you also have a course called Let a Podcast Out. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, so one of the things I do is I coach entrepreneurs who work in wellness and are scaling online, and I have a whole group of them, and they all want to start a podcast. And yeah, and I've never had clients that wanted to really start podcasts before and ready. And so we've been really in this mode of starting podcasts, and it's really overwhelming for people at the beginning. Like, what mic gear do I get? How do I upload it? What should I talk about? Do I get guests? What if I'm not good? Can you tell us a little bit about, like, when you teach podcasting, what that process looks like for you, and how to overcome some of those initial fears?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to give you a link to my course, and then
Absolutely. We'll put it in the show notes.
You can send them my way if you don't want to
Sure.
focus on that.
Sure.
I mean, it really just came out of a need. Like you said, I've been podcasting forever, and I was getting so many emails being like, I want to start a podcast. What do you recommend? What kind of microphone do you use? And it was like, oh my God, this is all I'm going to do ever is answer and I was like, I'm not an expert. And so what I say is like, I'm not this type of podcasting that I teach. I call it DIY podcasting. I'm not Gimlet. I'm not NPR. I'm not a podcasting network. This is a home setup. It's not perfect. It's podcasting. It's kind of like the journaling of podcasting, I guess. It's just sharing in real time. And I wanted anyone who wants to start a podcast, I think they should be able to do so. And when I was starting podcasting, I liked the interviewing and talking to people aspect about it, but everything else overwhelmed me. And I'm the type of person that like, if I get overwhelmed, I'll just quit. So if I can't find the remote, I just like won't watch TV, that sort of thing. Oh, a weird analogy, because like I haven't had a TV in like 15 years, but anyway, when I was a child, that would happen. And so anyway, when I wanted to start this podcast, my boyfriend at the time was like, you're good at this. I'll handle the getting it on iTunes and get you a microphone and do all of that and just like do this. And if I wouldn't have had him, I honestly would not have made a podcast. And so I was like, and I like haven't talked to him in like 10 years, but I'm so happy that happened, because I wouldn't have, this thing is so meaningful to me and so useful to me. And I don't even know if he like knows the impacts that he had on me, or that I'm even still like doing this weird thing he helped me start, 7 years ago. Yeah, but I want to be that for other people. And so I started doing podcast advising, just like you would have a financial advisor or someone to get you started on a new project. I started doing that with people one-on-one, and that was really cool because I saw these great podcasts come into the world, and I consulted with a lot of really interesting people who should definitely have podcasts. Like you said, like entrepreneurs and writers and people who are doing really cool things in the world. I helped them also have a podcast. And then I was like, okay, maybe I could help even more people do this. So I worked really hard on making this online course. It's an online workshop that takes you through everything from coming up with a concept and naming a show to interviewing, which is my favorite part, and talking to people, and then marketing, getting it to iTunes, monetizing it eventually. And I give all of my actual trackers in Excel of how I track guests and sponsors and all of my email templates. And I really just like open up lift up the hood and tell you everything that I do for Let It Out. And then also I interviewed over a dozen other podcasters, people who, have shows much larger than mine, and ask them exactly what they did. And so that's part of it too. And then the piece that I love most about the workshop, Let a Podcast Out, is that at the end, there's like live calls with me, and there's like a whole thing. But at the end, every semester they have the opportunity after 6 months to submit a episode of their show or a clip from their show. And I choose one to be aired on the Let It Out on my show and interview them. And that's really cool because it incentivizes people. I've done so many online courses and like had logins for all these online courses, and then like never done anything with them. So I didn't want that to be the case with this. So I incentivized it to have this deadline. And then that way people can actually make a podcast, and they can, we pick a winner every year. And it's so cool to see that day on my calendar when I listen to all those podcasts is like my favorite thing, because I can't believe I was able to help people start something that maybe they would have been too overwhelmed to do on their own.
Yeah. So fulfilling watching them like actually create it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Wow. So for those who are listening who are like, I want to start a podcast, where do they go?
letapodcastout.club, or just like email me or text me, or like don't text me. I mean, I'm not gonna like give my number right now. Yeah, I don't know why I said text me. Like on Instagram, I mean, or whatever. we have a Let a Podcast Out.
DM Katie on.
And the Let a Podcast Out Instagram is actually a really good spot because just podcast related news and info, and it's like anything just podcast related, but like through my feed. So it's kind of like weird and funny. And that's a really, like, follow that on Instagram, because that'll let you know like what we're doing. And we do like free hangouts, and it's a like fun Instagram to follow. It's really small, and we have a good community there, so you can message me there.
Cool. Yeah. Me and Cody love talking about, we nerd out on like podcast gear. I'm like, Cody, I got the new Sennheiser. Head at your Lewis House used these. We totally nerd out on the tech side of it. And Cody, you listen to a lot more. He listens to a lot more podcasts than I do. I listen to a few, but Cody's
I've been listening for a while. Yeah.
He wants to do your type of show where it's 2.5 hours. And David
he always cuts us off at an hour. And he's like, we run out of stuff to say, and I go, no, it's just getting good. And most of the good stuff happens right after he cuts us off, and then the 10 minutes we chat with the guests after is like the best stuff, but we can't share it.
Let's pretend we just ended the podcast since
right.
Well, I agree with Cody. I mean, I think you guys should make your show longer, because I find the exact same thing. After about 45 minutes, people get comfortable. After an hour, people get kind of loopy and kind of sleepy, and you can just be with each other, and you forget that you're recording, and it's great. It's like,
and that's when the good stuff happens.
Totally.
That was Katie Dalebout. It was a really good show. Cut. Hey, Katie, thanks.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Who do you think was funnier on that episode, like me or Cody? Like, what did you
This is the after show. That's David's insecurities come out. Who do you like better?
I like you guys equally.
Thanks. So bad. Tell us what you really think about podcasting.
I hate podcasting and journaling. It's the worst.
I just do it in the fame.
I just thought it would be really lucrative. I thought a career in podcasting and journaling I'm in it for the money. So
that's right. Of course, we found out that podcasting costs more money.
Exactly.
What?
What?
Hey. What we do, Katie, is since we're not recording anymore, me and Cody teach intuitive training work. So like right now we're a year in with a group of students that we're teaching them how to read energy, how to open up their spiritual abilities, and kind of that whole side of meditation. So in a lot of meditation, like you were saying, when you do Vedic or mantra style meditation, or people do a lot of Vipassana kind of body scanning, we really teach people how to, I don't know, take it to the next level and close their eyes and really find their own answers, which is why a lot of people come to meditation in the first place. Like they obviously are missing something, otherwise they wouldn't bother closing their eyes and reflecting, right? So we teach them how to really close their eyes and learn how to see energy. And one of the ways that you do that, surprisingly, is by like learning how to read other people. So it's like when we read other people, there's a reflection in there for us. Like for me, when I was going through relationship stuff all the time, which is kind of my MO, I ended up reading hundreds of people, all with the same relationship questions. And it was like, instead of reading a physical book, I was reading these books of people and the energy they were in and what they were going through. And that reflection helped me move through each layer in myself. And so what we've found is like when we train people, we have them read lots and lots of people, and through that they work through so many layers, and then when they get neutral enough they can start like reading themselves. It's kind of hard at the beginning, but like I don't know, Cody, if you agree with this, but it's like after we work with lots of people, it starts to get easier to reflect on ourselves. And I think podcasting is similar, Katie. It's like you sit across from people and they spill their guts and they share about their lives, and it like opens up something in you as well. Like I learned something from everybody that comes on. I'm like learning from you. Like as you're talking, I'm sweating it out. I'm like letting it out. I'm like, oh my God, she's so open and authentic. Where am I not?
Gosh, no.
It's true. I mean, I found that same thing through podcasting, that for whatever reason, when we come together in this way and talk, by the end, I don't know, something shifted. It's kind of like a reading, something cathartic about it, and something transformative about being in this conversation with every guest we've had. I mean, it's just,
And then I always want,
that's been amazing to me.
yeah. And then I just like crave cookies.
I wrote an article a couple months ago, last year sometime, for The Fullest. I have a monthly column there, and I wrote this article called How Conversation Became My Meditation, which is, I'll send it to you guys because I feel like you'd be into it, but it's essentially this. It's like how, you know, it's what I was saying before, of like you're doing one thing. I think in a society where we're constantly multitasking, of like on our phones and also at dinner and also walking down the street and, you know, just kind of always a little bit distracted. This is a welcomed phenomenon when you're recording where I haven't been on my phone since we started, and neither of either of you. And like, we're not doing anything. We're not eating. We're not like doing anything other than this. And I think that's weirdly a welcomed change that feels good. But I think it's interesting vulnerability like breeds vulnerability. And these conversations are such a reflection of where I am because of the questions I'm asking. And I share a lot about myself in the conversation because it feels stunted if I'm like, tell me this really deep, dark thing about your breakup. I'm going to first divulge like, oh my God, I just had a breakup and like, I'm crying. I mean, that's what this whole like last season of my podcast was for me. And so if I hadn't, I'm not
need another hour.
Yeah, I'm not going to get the information from not information, but I'm just not going to get the present. Like if I had met them for coffee without recording, it wouldn't have just been this one-sided, like, tell me about your last breakup. It would have been like,
right.
I'm dealing with this. This is how I'm feeling. Have you ever felt anything similar? Because the human experience is the human experience, and we're not all that different, you know?
Absolutely right. Yeah, so breakups.
That David's just in the middle of that. So
I'm teaching a class tomorrow at Parsley Health, actually, on healing, creating relationships. So I'm in the energy of it. Like I'm in it right now.
I mean, it's everything. It's like I've had some really beautiful conversations about it on my podcast this last season, but it's, you know, I had this, do you guys know Mari Andrews? She's a very famous illustrator, and you probably don't even know it, but you're following her on Instagram. And she did the podcast, and she very prolifically writes about love and dating and relationships. And she said to me, she sometimes relishes being in that space of heartbreak because there's so much richness there. And it's so potent that she was like, when you take something away, you naturally are going to fill that space, and you're probably going to do it with something good. And she was like, when am I going to learn Portuguese if I don't have another breakup? And she really kind of reframed it in this interesting way. And talking about the spectrum of things too, when you're in this heightened emotional state. And this is what I've found, because I've been in this somewhat recently, and the feeling of someone after loss or grief of any type or anything jarring, change, there's this term called heightened emotional state that my last podcast guest told me about. And it's something that basically like everything is intensified. Of like someone buying me a cup of coffee is like I won the lottery. And like someone not texting me back is like I just took a bullet, you know? So it's like these extremes that we kind of are in. And just kind of being able to find some laughter in that and be like, okay, this is this temporary thing where everything's intense right now, and that will pass too.
That's so true. I've experienced that. I've definitely experienced that.
Yeah.
I've talked to so many people, Katie, who like going through the heartbreak thing or the relationship thing, and I see it like become all consuming. It's fascinating. Really is. Even like long-term meditators, really, you know, conscious people that I know, they hit a relationship thing and they just like lose it. I'm not talking just about myself, Cody.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying I can hear your telepathy.
I mean, you could be talking about me. So
talk about anybody.
It's intense. Yeah. I think relationships are like it's everything. It's like how we see ourselves. It's the mirrors of how we see ourselves. And so to take that away or to change that, it's like there's nothing, I don't think there's anything more intense in the world to feel than relationships with other people. I mean, I think I believe it's why we're here, is like to grow and change, and do that through relationships is the quickest way to grow and change and see where you're small and where you want to be different. It's the quickest way to evolve, I think.
Could not agree more.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we are out of time in this post podcast interview that we are recording to share, but pretending we're not. Katie Dalebout, you're amazing. You're such a light. Thank you so much for being here. And for all of you listening, if you want to check out more of Katie's work, it's katiedalebout.com and let a podcast out.club if you want to take her podcast course. It looks really cool. And Let It Out, her book, Let It Out, her podcast on iTunes. So good. Katie, thank you so much for being here today and enlightening me and Cody. I feel like a deeper person after that conversation.
Oh man, thank you guys. Yeah, friends forever. This was really lovely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
so glad we could get you on. Yeah.
And me and Cody are going to go journal right now and talk about it. And we'll let you know what happens.
Great. Let me know what you think of the book and how it feels for you to write. I want to know.
Totally.
Absolutely. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you everyone for listening, guys. We will see you next time on Energy Matters. Take care.
See you, everybody.
Bye.